So a little bit of talk about, in plain English, how trauma gets formed, and then uh, some of the time gap within the brain about how sometimes trauma reactions can take over, and then my frontal cortex, which is the reasoning part, catches up and goes, "Hey, hey, hey, what just happened here? Why did you say that? Could have done something different." And and then the amygdala, which we'll talk about, the amygdala and the hippocampus, parts of the brain, about how they were evolved to be very well intended for survival and fight or flight, but how in our modern world they really create a lot of false positives. And I get jacked up on adrenaline and react about stuff and then know how and why that happened. And then finally, some tools, tools that you can get through a therapist. And some of these are sort of self help. So, in the world of working with people who have past memories, um, some in the NLP world, which came around, that's neuro linguistic processing. Therapists started to notice that if you ask somebody about an event from the past, their eyes will go in a certain direction. It's generally a quadrant in the brain that's called visual remembering. So if I were to ask you guys, and I'm going to glance around, although half of you are on no video, did you have did you have a bicycle as a kid? Um, and what color was it? Do you remember pedaling around town? Do you remember the other boys? And so if I were working with you individually, I would look at that and sort of notice which direction your eyes go. And it turns out that we are very visual creatures. So the eyes have a really strong linkage neurologically to where the memory is stored in the brain. So then they started talking about bad shit that happened. But they don't want to get too deep because it'll re traumatize somebody if they're asked to describe in detail all the shit that happened. But do you remember the time XYZ? Can you see it? Same thing happened. The eye goes to a certain position. So what EMDR does, and all right, let me back up again. Having the memory in there, the video part of the memory, that's not so bad. What causes a problem is the emotional track. So those video memories that are stored in the mind, they're like they have visual, auditory, and then what we can add to it is physical as a human, physical memory, um, gustatory, which is taste, and olfactory, which is smell. And I will work with some veterans who they're driving down Atlantic Boulevard and a smelly diesel truck passes them. They're they're back in freaking Iraq. That diesel smoke. Um, but it's not so much they remember what they saw in Iraq; it's the emotion that got tracked as a sixth track in the movie they're remembering. And and there's a thing called SUD score. We don't have to call it that. What a lot of the practitioners call it is an emotional activation score from 1 to 10.
Hmm.
That's the part that causes problems. That's the part that the amygdala and the vagus nerve remember in 10 milliseconds and jack up the rest of the sympathetic nervous system with adrenaline, cortisol. The heart gets beating, and the liver manufactures glucose from glycogen and flashes all that into the circulatory system, and it hits all the muscles, and I'm suddenly superhuman strength, all in 10 milliseconds. Incredible. So it's that emotional part of that movie memory, the emotional track, that can get triggered at a current time based on some similarity to the past. Does that make sense? And the diagram I've included, I think that might be a really good place to start to become aware, your own self-awareness. It's really a cognitive behavioral tool that you can start to use. Oh, thank you, John. To it's a little blurry, but such is the price of this type of thing. Oh, he got it. John the magician, thank you. Now we could just walk through this, but if some of you guys have well, there you go. Subjective units of distress scale. Thank you. After a while, I forget what the acronyms mean. It's nothing to do with a bathtub. Okay. If you have an 8x10 piece of paper and want to create your own diagram like this one, it can be very helpful. I've been doing it with pretty much everybody I'm working with, and they go, all right, this doesn't fix it, but this really gives me a sense for what's going on inside my brain. Anxiety Release is a mobile app that uses auditory bilateral stimulation for relieving. Yeah, we can get to that when we get to the sound therapy stuff. So down the line right down the middle of the page is got this oval almond shape. That's the amygdala. And the word amygdala, apps, for those of you who want to become what do you call that game when you know all the details? The contest. Anyway, amygdala in Greek means almond. So, because it's kind of shaped like that. So there's your amygdala, and that vertical line is really somewhat of a timeline. So over to the left, you might jot down the time span of a trauma event or series of events. So with some of the folks I've worked with, they've been in the Middle East during 2 or 3 different tours. One guy was in Vietnam on the deck of an aircraft carrier for 20 years, shore duty 10. And on the deck, he witnessed all kinds of shit, noise, men getting blown overboard, men getting run over, attacks from enemy aircraft. So time span. So you put the dates up there so you can register that in your brain. And then down the left side, you see the different signals that your amygdala took in. Now, the amygdala is hot wired, directly wired to the 5 senses. It just takes in raw data, kind of like the radar thing on a conning tower on a ship. Just takes in raw data. Does not interpret it, except to the extent that it gets a score and a SUD score, or I call it an activation score. So in the case of, well, is there anyone here who wants to volunteer a particular traumatic event? Or I can use examples that I've run across. All right. Hearing none. So I've got a whole bunch of veterans, no names, of course. I have a veteran who is military cop, posted to many different bases around the world over a period of 20 years. And this military cop would come upon crime scenes that were just horrendous and evidence of violent shit. People splattered all over the place. So talking to this person, I say, can you jot down some of the just brief notes, the visual memories? Just a couple of notes. Don't go deeply into it because you'll start returning to the past. Just jot down some notes. What about auditory? And I've had veterans tell me about heavy gunfire, mortar fire, vehicles exploding. During the night, the seek shelter alarms, blop, 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 seek shelter, where they all go down into the bunkers. Um, so different auditory notes, physical notes, just the percussion from explosions. Boom. I've got a few veterans who were their Bradley fighting vehicle that they were in was hit by enemy fire, and one or two of them was blown off the top of the Bradley with permanent injuries. So various physical things. Um, and there's taste, as I mentioned. Some of them can taste the grit from explosions, and smell, as I mentioned, diesel exhaust. If I've had veterans who have, when they smell barbecue, they smell burning comrades.
Mhm.
When they see a fire, they see burning comrades. So you jot those down. And I say, you're doing great. You're doing great. And remember now, we're just in a room together. We're just pulling up this video that's stored in your mind. Just stored in your mind. It's not happening now. I said, so take those, uh, take those notes you wrote, and for each one, give it an activation score from 1 to 10. And the ones they're going to remember are the 7s, 8s, 9s, and 10s. And I also ask them, can you take a wild ass guess about how many during your tours of service, how many of those uh, visual items you saw? And one guy who served on the deck of a aircraft carrier, we sort of did a rough calculation. He saw a total of all of these visual, auditory, everything, about 750,000 trauma events in his 20 years. And so we're quantifying, making it cognitive, getting a little bit out of the emotional, making this a cognitive arrangement. And so you
Uh,
go down those. And then yeah, David,
750,000 sounds like an extremely high number.
it is.
I,
That takes the cake in terms of the ones I saw.
but he must have seen, like, some days seen hundreds of terrible things.
Yeah. And and some of them were terrible in the sense of someone getting killed, but terrible in the sense of um, a fighter jet lands and it's got bullet holes in it on the deck of the aircraft carrier,
Yeah.
and so he realizes harm was done. You know, it's his men. His man just got
Yeah.
shot. So there's a whole variety, and his was the highest frequency. The one who was the military cop lost count, just decided to stop counting or stop estimating because there were just so many. Um, and some people have had, one particular trauma that just registered deeply and painfully. So it's really not about comparing, it's for each person to do their own calibration. All right, Steve, blessings. We'll see you next time. So then I asked the person, all right, so draw some arrows. Now, got ahead of myself. On the left side of the amygdala, draw what looks like a thumb drive inserted into the amygdala. And we all know thumb drives, they store data, transport it from one place to another, just data, whatever kind of data it is. And so draw arrows from your visual, auditory notes, physical notes, draw arrows down to that thumb drive and realize that amygdala now has an input data load of, in that guy's case, 750,000 different trauma signals. And they can do that. They go, wow, that's a lot of data that gets jammed into that tiny little amygdala without the help of the frontal cortex to sort out shit, make sense of it. So then I say, all right. So I say, so let's go to recent times. What's something that caused you to get triggered? Our diagram disappeared. There we go. Um, and so we might say one veteran was saying, well, I was driving down the road and I suddenly got two semis were on both lanes on the side of me. And he said, I just started freaking. And one of them was a submariner down under the water when shit, and there was a fire on board, and he was down, way below decks, in the third bunk down. So huge. you know. Another guy was in a Bradley fighting vehicle, and so he just gets this claustrophobic powerlessness. So I say, all right, so let's do a reality check over in the third column. What's today's date? And what are your realities? Even though you were driving, knowing with your cerebral brain and the likelihood of driving and your driving skills, were you really in harm's way? No, logically. So go down that list, the visual, the auditory, physical, and put down today's date in the reality, and what's the real score for risk of danger? And most of them will say a 1 or a 2. I say, so here's the dilemma. Your amygdala does not account for time difference from 25 years ago to current time, or spatial difference from time zones away, 7,000 miles away to today. Amygdala doesn't do that. The amygdala takes in current time any little piece of visual, auditory, physical, any little stimulus. Doesn't have to be a match, just something that flickers in the similarity contest, and it flashes up into the adrenal system just like it did 25 years ago. Let's call that a false positive. So the guy says, well, what do I do with that? I said, well, now you've got a chance to be better prepared. If you go down that middle column, recent triggers, you can say, aha, here's the things that have triggered me recently. So now I can be prepared and know what's going on in my deep amygdala vagus nerve system. And when I feel that adrenaline hit, I can sort of do the cognitive behavioral thing of, okay, amygdala, you're now giving me a false alarm because my cerebral cortex says I'm in okay space. I'm not in real danger. 4th of July, firecrackers. Oh my goodness. However, veteran can say, okay, amygdala, those are my neighbors. They're having some fun. I'm in okay space. I'm safe. I'm in the house. So amygdala, calm down. Now, that requires repetition, 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 repetition. Because it only took 10 milliseconds for that amygdala to get jammed up 25 years ago. But it takes a lot of repetition if you're doing this on your own to deprogram it. And every time you can tell yourself, I'm in a safe space. I'm home. Those are my neighbors just having fun with some firecrackers. I'm okay. That creates a new beginning of a new neuron pathway. And
So,
with repetition, you build a series of positive neuron pathways. The old one loses power. David.
I've used affirmations for years to tell myself, hey, I'm okay. And I don't believe it.
I don't either.
And that's what happens is how do I get to an intervention that I believe in makes a difference?
The difference here, and this is not pulling a rabbit out of a hat, the difference here is anticipation of what's going to trigger me. And as I proceed through my day, I can anticipate and go, okay, false alarm. So I'm anticipating rather than just giving myself an affirmation. I'm okay, I'm okay, I'm okay. I look like, Clint Eastwood, Clint Eastwood, Clint Eastwood. Without a context of data and a specific set of memories, I think that affirmation doesn't do anything.
Jim, thinking about Dave's question, I had the same feeling, and what the aha for me, and I know you'll get to it, is, wow, if I do that affirmation with EMDR, if I do that affirmation with tapping, some of these things that might lock it in a very different way than I'm just repeating it cognitively. So I know this is still on this cognitive side,
Right.
but when you
Cognitive.
when you get into those other things, I'd be real interested in, you know how I individually could take some of those affirmations and use tapping, EMDR, some other things to lock them in a different way.
So yeah, this part is to know, like, if my car is sputtering, I don't want. I just drive it into the shop. I sort of really want to know what's going on in the engine. Tell me what's going on, what's misfiring, so I'll know what it is for next time. I'll recognize it. And so I should know whether I should be alarmed when it's sputtering or it just needs some kind of a tune-up thing. It's no big deal. That's kind of what this is. This is the part where you start to realize what's going on in your own circuitry. Now, and so through the self-practice, you have this tool as one baseline thing to know your inner circuitry and what's going on. So we can go to, I know in the other session you had, you learned about vagus nerve and how it gets activated. Excuse me, water here. We can talk all day, the pipes get dry. I know you did some breathing exercises, and I do that with lots of folks, very deep, and it's not breath holding. There's lots of techniques. I've worked with a few folks lately. All three that I'm thinking of had serious PTSD. I was able to help them through a meditative breathing go down into what the Hindus would call the true self. It's way down into the inner unconscious, which is quiet, and they become aware of it. In the busy brain, they recognize just goes into chill mode. It's there. And they just absolutely, their vagus nerve is so totally calm through that breathing meditation technique. They have zero anxiety and they feel fully present and able to, conduct their daily life. Did in the previous session, did they do any sound therapy techniques? I know Steve brought that up. So let's try that. So it turns out that the vagus nerve and many other parts of the body are sensitive to frequencies. We are electronic people. There are different parts of the brain that operate in different frequencies. There's alpha, beta, delta, gamma, different parts of the brain that in that frequency is conducive to different types of brain operation. Delta is deep sleep. Beta, I think, is kind of creative thought. And so when music frequencies are played, or any kind of sound frequency that are similar to those frequencies, you can induce a different state of mind. And so, John, are you able to pull up that vagus nerve clip that was so?
I'm going to start playing it.
Let me just introduce this. This guy, Jim Donovan, he had a guitar band back in the early 90s. I thought I remembered his name. It was something like Broken Root or something like that back in the 90s. Anyway, he is way past that now, and he does sound therapy. And he's not a therapist, but he produces therapeutic sounds and posts them. And I've got a subscription, so I've accessed a bunch. And he's got one thing where he actually cured his own cancer using sound therapy. And I've heard of that happening before. So this is one that he's got several, but this is one which is restoring your vagus nerve. And whoever said before, it sounds like static white noise. And to hear it firsthand on his website, you also can hear some waves. You can see that wave line. I can't see it, but sort of wave line. That's kind of like waves of the ocean. So you notice that. So there's a constant background and then waves of the ocean, all of which is calming and resonates with the vagus nerve to bring it back down to a settled state. So, Mr. Orchestra Leader. Want to close your eyes, follow, go ahead. So take a breath. And that goes on for like half an hour, but just decided to put an hors d'oeuvre up. Anyone have any response to that internally? What'd you notice? Some words.
Calmer.
More calm. I couldn't help but notice the timing on the mantra part, the when we did the polyvagal nerve training with Mario, he one of the things that he covered was a 4-7-8 breathing technique, and the exhale phase was 8 seconds, which was about how long that mantra was. And the pause between each one was about 4 seconds. And it was just interesting coincidence. So
Yeah,
one thing
I like singing along. I got carried right into chanting myself.
Yeah.
And I was doing the same thing. I was doing the chant with that audio, and I could feel that resonance in my body, which I really liked. I also wondered, it seemed like the third syllable, the got longer for each breath. Is that, so I'm presuming there's a purpose to that.
I'm sure there is. Not sure why.
Okay.
Now, you may notice, you hear about people doing Om. Well, this is the Om thing, the Buddhist and Hindu mantra, but he stretches out into 4 distinct syllables to really get the resonant frequencies. And they resonate in different levels. Ah is resonating up higher. Om is resonating lower. Is resonating lower. And then Ma takes you back up again. So he moves the frequencies down through the top of the vagus nerve, down through the middle, down to the bottom, and back up again. And I don't know if any of you picked up a tapping in the background. So that could be related to, the physical tapping programs that you get. I mean, there's lots of parallels and avenues into some of these nerve regulations. So this guy, if you want it, he's got some good stuff. This was just one that I picked because it focused really on the vagus nerve. That's why the Buddhist monks wake up at 3 a.m, because between 3, 4, and 5 is when the unconscious mind is most vulnerable. That's when I have my weird ass dreams, at that time in the morning. So they get up ahead of time and start doing this stuff to get ahead of it. They drive the bus before the spook dreams drive the bus. So, sound therapy. Now, any questions or comments on that stuff? And if you want, I can send you out to the group the link to his website. And he's got too many choices, so I just went into one subscription with this kind of stuff. So I'll put it out. Yeah, and I think I paid, I don't know, $150 or something for a big collection. Other places would probably charge a whole lot more. So we could circle back around to visual, which is brain spotting. So we talked about, well, I'm moving rapidly along here. Any other questions so far or comments? Okay. So this was sound getting into the vagus nerve. We talked about cognitive behavioral, anticipating adrenaline hits and being able to breathe through it, saying, okay, I can retool myself after many repetitions. And I've had success with that too in my own life. I realized, I know what that trigger was. Yep, old news, amygdala. That person meant me no harm. We're going to reprogram this type of situation to stay calm. So visual, the first discovered, really, the first popular thing was EMDR, where therapists realized, back to this, where's that visual connection between visual memory, my eyes look over here, and not just the movie part of the memory, but the emotional part that got recorded with it 25 years ago, that SUD score or activation score. So they discovered that, I guess through experimentation, if the person the therapist helps the person get in a grounded place. They also remember a time when you felt great about yourself. Yeah, I felt, the time I went skiing, it was just standing on top of the Alps. Oh my God, I've just felt wonderful. Or at the beach, just felt wonderful. Stay in that state of mind. And now go to that memory. And I'm going to move my fingers and follow my fingers as you start to remember that memory. And at some point, the therapist with, astute observation may notice that the person's eyes jump. And odds are that's the place where the visual connection is back into the optic storage place in the memory. And I said, okay, now keep thinking about that thing and follow my fingers at the same time. And they start doing this. And it seems to have the effect of breaking the link between the visual connection and the emotional stored in the movie. And so that was one. And so there's EMDR that you could do with a therapist. And there's also some self EMDR, which I've not looked at. I just pulled up a website there. You can check it out, see if that works. But more advanced, I found it, I'm not even sure how, about a year ago, called brain spotting. And I checked it out, and it was sort of created by a therapist, David Grand, who had been using EMDR quite a bit. And then he sort of noticed that if he got the person to just stay in a relaxed state and just find that place in the field of vision where that internal activation seems to be the strongest, and the client will say, yeah, oh, right there, right there. All right. And he's got pointers, not his finger. I've got, a set of these pointers, look like this. And yeah, David's got his pointer up. And so just staying relaxed, and I'm right here with you. We're in a good space. We're fine. There's nothing going on. This is just memories coming up. But stare at that space. Just look at it and let your brain and mind come up with whatever it wants to. Don't be impatient. Just let it go. And if you look at his website, and I think I put a couple of links to see a demonstration of it, his explanation and a demonstration, the mind will start to unravel the old entanglement of stimuli that happened at that time. Because those neuron pathways are in there literally, the way I view it is like a tangle, a mess that got jammed into the amygdala in no particular order, just a fucked up mess of signals. And as you stare at that spot, the brain seems to have, in my common language, a natural ability to let those tangled memories begin to unravel, kind of one at a time. And so after a few minutes, the person sitting there was saying, yeah, I remember now that, yeah, XYZ was happening at the same time. And now I remember, yeah, my father said something like that when I was a kid. And the therapist says, that's good. So your father said that. You remember that. Good. So let your brain go to the next thing and just on whatever comes up and out. And the person may sit for a few minutes and just staring at that spot. It's kind of like if you got a cut on your arm, the body's natural ability is to start to heal the cut from the inside outward. Just a natural ability. It's created to do that. I think that's kind of like this. Given the right tool and relaxed state, the brain will go into those tiny little details that it really didn't remember much about and start to unravel them. And when they unravel, the healing begins because it's the trauma that's the entanglement. And as they unravel, there's some clarity. And the emotional stuff can start to dissipate. So as David Grand goes through some of these demonstrations, the person may start out as, yeah, that was just a real shit. That was just a real shit thing, a real shit storm. Well, what was the activation score? I was a 9, maybe a 10. And as he goes through this process, which might take 20 minutes of the person just being with that spot and letting thoughts and old emotions unravel. And after a while, say, so what's your activation score now? It's about a 6. Good. Okay. Well, keep going if you choose. Okay. And some of those demonstrations, by the time they're done, the person is down to, they can remember the details, but the activation score is down to a 1 or a 2 or 3. And then some of them even start to chuckle because it reminds them of something funny, or somebody was nearby and they heard them laughing. So that's the brain spotting. It's finding the spot in the brain and providing a venue, a tool, a safe space for that brain to just start unravel that tangle of signals that's on the amygdala. And I think that really does deprogram the data that's on the amygdala, or at least the emotional part. I also put a link to, hang on, Stephen, just one second, a link to self brain spotting. And I listened to that one all the way through, and it's a therapist who figured out how to do that for yourself. And just follow the spot and keep letting things unravel. And sometimes it leads to connections to previous traumas. People may have a series of traumas throughout their life. And just a side note on that, PTSD seems to be this chunk. You've had a trauma, but the World Health Organization is going to put out a new diagnosis called complex PTSD, which is when the trauma started perhaps as a child. The child did not have the ability to sort through the incidents in any way. So it starts in childhood and then may get exacerbated in adulthood, in military service or first responders or any other violent situation. So back to what I was saying, staring at the spot may say, well, that car accident, which, knocked me for a loop, killed my dog, every other thing. I'm thinking it takes me back to something that happened when I was 7. And it'll go back there. So there may be some repeated sessions going through some of the trauma stuff. Anyways, Stephen, you had something.
Oh, I just was curious if I hadn't watched the self-spotting one. I did watch the, the videos you sent, the MDR one and the general spotting. Is there a place in that for then replacing, overlaying a new memory? Do we do that in that, or is this just more, it comes out, and each time it gets less traumatic?
If that's a great question. Seems to be all right, the best very street-like analogy I could use is, if I have food poisoning and I'm able to puke it all up, I will feel better just by having the puke gone.
Well, that's so much of what other neuroscience stuff that I've read is we re-stimulate those memories, and the gift of sometimes what we do on the weekend and things like that is create a new story, even if it didn't quote happen in reality. We're overlaying it, I am loved, or whatever it might be. So do these techniques allow that?
If you're doing it on self, it might be tougher unless you know how to proceed through that. But when I work with folks, I will say, so who are you now? Yeah. And I do a visualization. If you could take all that trauma, distress, and how much do you weigh, by the way? Oh, 195. If you could take all that trauma, stress, and put it in a hefty trash bag and tie it up tight, put it on a scale next to you, how much would it weigh? Oh, 65 pounds. That's the emotional unconscious knowing that. And when they get done with this, I go, where's that bag? Gone. Well, that left a place inside you. What do you want to put in it? And I actually use with a lot of folks, I go, so when you were a teeny little boy, I go back to the golden boy thing. Have that little boy color a picture for you of his happy day, his happy world. And I use that expressive voice. And the answers I get are, oh, he's drawing outdoors and mountains and doggies and playgrounds. And what colors? Yellows and blues and greens. And I go, now inhale that stuff. Because that's who you really are. There's your true self. And so that kind of and I haven't seen where David Grand, those guys create that part, but I've thrown it in so people can use that as a tool to, help themselves fill it in with who they really are, true self. Yo, Ken.
Yeah, so, to your point, Stephen, what I know from a method of EMDR, part of the process is they refer to what we're talking about with the negative memory in the amygdala and what the brain does with that. They call that a negative cognition. And, like what Jim was talking about, going back to a more pleasant thing, something that's more true and real to your true self. Once we find some of those, they would label that as a positive cognition. And part of that whole process is installing the positive cognition to replace the negative cognition.
Yeah.
Does
Now,
does that answer your question?
hang on,
I
Lou.
was just struck with how, when we really do a carpet process well, or we've got the opportunity to fill the hole,
Yeah.
whether,
Mhm.
whether it's rebirthing or just the fall or whatever, and so that was something we learned. So the positive overlay seems like a real important part, the positive cognition.
And a lot of these processes start with bringing the person to their positive resource state, skiing down the Alps, sitting on the beach, feeling totally wonderful. And so when you get rid of the garbage, you start to reabsorb the totally wonderful and skiing down the Alps, because that's who you really are. And sometimes I'll throw in, so what animal from nature feels like that to you? Oh, an eagle. Ah, you're a powerful eagle. Yeah. So a lot of little other symbols, cognitive symbols that you can use to put in that place, positive affirmations. And that gets back around what David was talking about, is sometimes I'll ask somebody a practical question. So you've gotten this far by pushing through all this and seeking and finding the wisdom. Yeah. What qualities does that take? Persistence and wisdom and compassion. So, and I make an affirmation. So how's this fit? Jim, I'm a powerful, compassionate man. I just hate being vulnerable. And it boils it down, and some of them just get tears. Like, wow, that's exactly right. Well, say that 100 times a day, because realize what you just pushed through. So that's a way to circle back around to what you're talking about, David. But you got to link it to something rather than just have this positive affirmation. I look like Clint Eastwood. I'm brave, without having a context. So, Lou.
Yeah. So this is good. I wanted to carry on maybe just a little bit about what Stephen was saying, and that is, so for me, one of the most powerful experiences I've had with MKP was coming to terms with the shadow of my negative critic. And, I think I understand at some level where that came from, and the negative critic sits right here and, helps me. And the thing that I'm wondering about is how, the trauma that was the core of my negative critic and other people doing your carpet work, how that shadow and, the carpet work goes ahead. What's the amygdala explanation for the befriending you and making use of your shadow?
So if you find the shadow, like when we do carpet work, they go back and recreate out on the carpet floor what Dad said, what he did, the look on his face, yada yada yada.
Mm-hmm.
Those are what was registered in the amygdala, 40 years ago. Then when you get through all that stuff, you pick a positive father, and then the positive father scoops up that boy and says, "You're wonderful. I'll take care of you forever. I love you to pieces." And then you go step into that energy and the tears roll
Yeah.
because you're releasing all the old pain.
So
that
then
is-
really,
That's
Go ahead.
sort of a cleansing of the amygdala and implanting new current time signals in the amygdala, visual, auditory. If you're holding each other, you're holding yourself on the carpet, physical. Sometimes they'll give you something to wash yourself and cleanse yourself, so it becomes physical, and there might be a sweet smell in it. So they use every sensory thing they can to try to anchor. There's the word, anchor this new belief. So you're kind of
So-
positing new data into the amygdala, and over time, the old data keeps getting more and more dissolved, and new stuff takes over,
Right.
so to speak.
Right. So yeah, I mean, fundamentally what you're saying is that the same multivagal analysis to some extent explains the carpet work resolution.
Yeah. And there are some techniques which I didn't bring up. There's one called, there's a guy who does, it's a form of hypnosis, rapid resource therapy, rapid resolution therapy.
Yep,
I was
I did
reading
that.
Who was that? Oh, David. Yeah.
I did that with the guy who created it.
Yeah. John
And I'm
Connolly.
still as screwed up as I was.
Well,
Oh,
everybody responds in different ways. I'm saying, I did it with a first responder who came upon a scene in Jacksonville where he went in as a first responder. He was on the fire and rescue team, and went into a house. They didn't know what to expect, and there were bodies splattered all over the place. And I used this John Connolly technique, and for this guy, it worked in 20 minutes. He just came back to the room from that meditative state, and it does like a shock twist of reimplanting new stuff on the amygdala and letting old stuff go in this flash of a switcheroo. And he just said, "Holy shit." And he was sort of reprogrammed. Now, that was the last time I saw him, but I didn't hear from him again. So I presume it had a good effect. Other people, it doesn't work at all. They just sit there. And, I was doing it with one guy. I said, "So what do you feel down in your torso?" "Oh, I feel a round area compressed down in my torso." And he was, did the breathing. He was down there, and I go, "What do you think it is? What's its texture? What's inside it?" "It's a gas." I said, "Sort of a cosmic message type gas?" "No, gas. I ate some shit for lunch." And he was serious. So I tried not to. I didn't laugh. I said, "All right. So let's move. Where else might you have a sensation?" But you never know. People respond. in
Or
different
there's the
ways.
bathroom.
Yeah.
I want to say, I did a piece about magic carpet guts, which was, around going out of even this space-time continuum, and I think the same idea of laying in a new memory applies even if the person, if he goes back to something that was not even in this dimension, and he's picking up the Holocaust, or he's picking up from a village 100 years ago, some experience, and again, it's still going into that amygdala, which doesn't know space, time, reality. Wait a minute, it's 2021. Why am I, feeling this wound from some battle 100 years ago? It still works.
Yeah, it can do it because the brain's got it recorded somehow. All right. So where are we here? So I did sort of a smorgasbord here of taste, listen, and touch, variety of approaches that you have a better understanding and some ways to move forward. Just personal comment. The brain is just, oh my God, is it just incredibly fascinating? And I don't predict. I just follow the dots, the breadcrumbs, I say, with each person about what tool to use and how to proceed. So where are we here? We're at 7:38. We still got some time. We can talk, discuss, do examples.
And Jim, just a minute ago, yeah, there's Dave Spofford waving his hand again.
Oh, David.
Didn't want to miss him.
So
He was hiding up in the tree. I couldn't see him.
with all of these techniques, I always run into a roadblock. And the roadblock is, for me, is I can't identify some awful thing that I witnessed or some awful trauma that I grew up with. I just know that basically my upbringing was as it was, and I turned out the way I did, and I'm not happy with it. And how do figuring out how to apply these techniques to like somehow boil that long-term traumatic experience, if you will. I mean, it was traumatic for me, I suppose. That from age 3 or 4 to age 20 or something. How do the challenge is to connect with it in a concrete manner, so that these techniques can actually have an effect on it.
Okay, perfect question. And you and I chatted a little bit yesterday. I won't reveal what we talked about unless you want to. But for example, you were talking about, you just mentioned stuff from your childhood.
Right.
And even though you may not remember specifics, your unconscious emotional mind can create a representation. You call it concrete, but it's a representation. Like, I'll ask somebody if you could, I'll ask you, David, if you could take, how old are you now?
66.
All right. So you're this 100% of a being, and you're 66. How much do you weigh?
Probably at the moment about 149.
Okay. So that's concrete. And now I ask you a different kind of question. So you're this 100% of a being, and just a gut feel, snap judgment, what percent of you is taken up by all that emotional legacy that happened as a kid? What percent of you is still in there? Kind of, it's like stains in your internal carpet. Wild guess.
75%.
Yeah, your unconscious knows that. It gave me a concrete answer for a very vague set of stuff down there. So if you could take that stuff and put it in a black trash bag, scoop it all in there in your psychic space here, scoop it all in and put it on a scale. How much does it weigh?
How much does it weigh?
Wild gut.
It weighs a couple thousand pounds.
No. It's got to be less. You said 75% of.
You're telling me that it has to have a weight that corresponds to a portion of my weight?
I'm
My
not
body's
telling you it
weight?
has to. I'm asking for your intuition. If you're 149 pounds and 75% is all that old distress, how many pounds would that be?
I can take 75% of 149.
Yeah, so your gut might
Which
tell you.
is 112 and a half, probably.
All right. So now that you got that bag,
112.
what do you suppose? What's your gut tell you about what's the color of the stuff in the bag?
Black.
Black. Would you want? By the way, would you want to untie that bag and take a good sniff?
No, not really.
Yeah. See, you're already.
You want me to?
No, I'm just asking. I'm the trail guide. What's the temperature in that bag?
It's pretty hot.
Yeah. It's and what's the texture in there?
It kind of just gives way whenever you reach in. It's very elusive.
Okay.
Kind
So
of empty.
there's a somewhat concrete description of your trauma experience. And one can work with that. and then start to do some of these processes that, and for example, if we did the brain spotting, it might be able to say, now that you know that, what's a good part of your life? What have you felt pretty content? What have you done well? And whatever your answer is. So you hold that. And so then you would go to perhaps a part where beginning to dissolve that negative stuff and go deep into, you can do it on that cognitive chart. You can imagine what some of the visuals were. Or in this case, it may be just the visual of the black plastic trash bag and the smell and the heaviness. And what in current reality, current times, might cause you to feel triggered and activate some of that 75%. And then you start to tell yourself using that cognitive chart, hey, amygdala, that's old news. That's from when I was, 8 years old. Right now, I live with a wonderful woman. I've got a good job. And you start to, as they say, count your blessings and create this different way of seeing and feeling yourself. So that's a possible way to begin to use some of this. There's a way to do it with the brain spotting, as I said. Start staring at the spot, and just see what may unravel. And it may not be absolute memories. It could be feelings or situations that you went through, but you can't remember the details. And there may be snapshots. You mentioned a couple of snapshots that you do remember that had meaning, negative meaning. And the truth is, you're an awesome, powerful man.
That's you.
And I notice you're having a belly laugh right now. That's coming from somewhere inside you. A belly laugh. What color is the belly laugh? What color is that?
It's multicolored. It's orange and yellow and green and blue and purple.
And that's who you are. That's your true self. So now you start to inhale that. While the trash bag is over there, you start to inhale that and flush that through your system and just marinate everything. And there comes a yawn, release of stress.
Very nice.
Or you're bored to death. So there's a little bit of a mix and match, but it can start with one of these techniques and blend into one of the other ones. So I was just following those breadcrumbs, and there they were. So, all right. Who else? What else? Questions?
Jim, I've got a question, even though you can't. So I raised my virtual hand. The image that came up for me, and I don't know if this works, but that great big heavy bag, I can imagine putting it on one side of a balance scale, and then put some memory that's positive, but try to put more of all the sensory things you were talking about attached to that image, so that positive gets heavier and heavier to balance out, that heavy black bag of shit.
Yeah. So there's your internal representation where you're making a concrete representation of something that's murky and just modeled through your inner emotional system. It's not in any one place. So that makes it concrete to use. Who wanted that tool? David? What concrete? Somebody said concrete before.
I did say concrete a while ago.
Yeah. And so you sort of watch for, like on a carpet floor, some of those experienced carpet floor leaders are looking for little nuggets that are showing up in the process. I call them little nuggets or breadcrumbs. Ooh, let's go with that and turn it into something wonderful. All right.
I'll tell you, part of what I like about what I'm hearing is there is no one right approach. And when you talk about the different sensories, visual, auditory, physical, taste, if I can find something that works for me, counterbalance the other stuff, then there's not like, oh, but I'm doing it wrong. What I'm hearing you invite me to do is take that negative bag and put it and see what happens in any of my past life experiences to counterbalance that. So I'm rewriting where I spend my mental and emotional energy, what I'm focusing on. Like the
John,
classic two wolf story. The one I feed is the one that gets bigger.
but I'm hearing, John, that it's not just cognitive, right? I mean,
Right.
the gift of all this last hour and a
Yes.
half is, the smell, the taste, the feelings, as
Yeah.
opposed to,
Mhm.
just going to describe something.
If you can pull up the cognitive and then attach the emotions that are
Right.
underneath the cognitive and bleeding into it, then you start to change that by creating a positive affirmation, and that dissolves the old cognitives and the emotions that went with it because they're old news.
Mm.
So it's work. It takes 10 milliseconds to fuck up an amygdala, and it takes several decades to clean it out. Maybe never. Oh, I have a quick story if you want to hear my personal quick story about how deep it can go. So, some of you know this, and I've described it to a couple people. I had 3 weeks ago, I had cataract and glaucoma surgery on my right eye, and a week ago, I had it done on my left eye. And I'm a science guy, I studied science, a couple of degrees before this therapy stuff. Um, and so I know process, procedure. I can, look it all up, and I know exactly how it works. I've done mechanical work and construction works. I got all that. But for my first surgery, in the 2 or 3 days leading up to the surgery, I started having body anxiety to beat. Oh my God. I was telling my wife, my inner body is just going nuts so with anxiety. And I went through the surgery fine. They sedate you, you're conscious. And I can remember being there and seeing three dots, from the machine that's staring into my eyeball. And then after the surgery, I was similarly just totally traumatized. I was functioning. I went back to work the next day for a few hours, but my body was just clanging fire alarms. And I knew exactly what it was. When I was a kid, my mother could get really angry and grab me by a leg and just smack the shit out of me with whatever she could get her hands on. So I was pinned, helpless, and here come objects flying at me, and there's nothing I can do about it. So I realized for both of these surgeries, I'm on a table, I'm sedated, I'm powerless, I'm pinned, and here's some guy coming at my eyeballs with a razor blade. And I was for the second surgery, apparently this happens to some people. They gave me the same level of sedation, but I went into complete sleep. He just dropped down. Apparently it happens. Sensitivity to the to the material. And the next day at the post-op, the doctor said to me, Jim, you just within a minute or two, you just went into a deep sleep, and then you started wrestling. You were wrestling. We had to get all the nurses and the anesthetist to hold you down. I wasn't fighting violently. I was just, you know. And I looked at him. I said, "No kidding. I know exactly what that was because I wasn't conscious, but way deep down in my amygdala sensed the body trauma, and it responded with similar response from 65 years ago. It's still stored in there." And I just calmly looked at him and said, I know exactly what it was, but I did not have post trauma after the second surgery because I'd already anticipated, like using that chart about I'm okay. I'm okay. Guy's good, safe, going to be fine. So combination of the two things, and he was like, whoa, what do we need to know? I said, no, it's deep trauma. Even I'm surprised. So, all right, what else? We're at 7:53.
I got a quick question for you, Jim. When you're doing these processes with the PTSD clients, do you find that nightmares and flashbacks are resistant to these methods or no?
Well, yeah, it since we can't do this about nightmares and flashback. Well, it depends. If the flashbacks during the daytime, this can help with that. If you do enough daytime processes, hopefully that can start to reprogram the unconscious and change the nature of nightmares.
Okay.
And some of them have shown improvement, and some have not. Some of the veterans are just so totally damaged. It's like a couple of them I'm working with. There's not much I can do. They do not respond to anything. Just really, really deeply damaged. And it's just sad. That's where I just sort of get tears ready to flow. It's like, God, just totally fucked, and they didn't ask for it.
Okay.
So, and one guy, the guy who had the gas pain, the gas thing, he's pretty much a very linear thinker, very linear, just linear. And then this last session, I said, he came in calmer, and I said, let's try the breathing meditation. He went down so deep, and I did the trash bag. Take all that stuff while he was in the trance state, put it over on the side on the table. And he went deep, 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 deep. And I said, what are you noticing? And he said, wonderment. I said, so what color is wonderment? It's blue. Blue like ocean water, blue like sky, beautiful stars. And he wasn't quite sure. I said, so hold your palms out with his eyes closed. Hold your palms out like a bowl and fill it with that blue. And then when you're ready, your palms will know when they want to come up, and you begin to wash yourself with the blue, and you start to just take it in, take it in, take it in. And he just transformed. I was sitting there like, holy shit. And I said, do you have one word to describe it? Wonderment. And I said, where's the bag of stuff? It's gone. Just gone. It's like, whoa, follow the breadcrumbs. And I wouldn't have guessed, just worked out really just totally well. So there you have it. The world of trauma. And we humans will probably keep creating trauma for ourselves and others for the next millennia.
Mhm.
So we work it one person at a time, work with each other. That's why you guys are so awesome to even have an interest in this stuff.